question, what are your plans to lower property taxes for us middle-class South Dakotans?
Well, that's a great question, and it's on a lot of people's mind. I think property taxes is probably one of the biggest issues that we face right now as a state. And I think there's a couple of reasons why. Well, first of all, we've seen skyrocketing valuations in the state lead to skyrocketing property tax bills. And I'm opposed to these property taxes for a couple of reasons. Number one, because as you've experienced, property taxes are taxing you on unrealized gains, something that we wouldn't do in other areas, but we do that through property taxes. But I think even more fundamentally, property taxes, at the end of the day, never really allow you to own your own land. It's somebody could spend 30 years of hard work and finally pay off that last mortgage payment, and once they've done that, they still owe this what seems like a rent check to the government. And if you don't pay that rent check, then the government's going to come knocking at your door and potentially pay your property. It's a bad system. It's a system that's been instituted across the country and we've gotten used to it over time, but let's face it, it's not a good system. So in the short term, what we'd like to do, we've created a task force. That task force membership is going to be announced next week. And that task force, as I mentioned earlier, is going to start out by looking at how can we cut the government. You know, there's been some proposals about shifting property taxes from one tax to another tax. And let's face it, if you really want to abolish all property taxes, it's so much money that you would have to shift from one tax to another tax. But before we do that, I think we should look at how we can actually cut the state government. And so that's what we're going to do in this task force. We're going to look at ways we can cut the state government, reduce the size of government. Of course, property taxes fund local effort, counties, etc. But the state does pay a share of the education funding at the local level. And so if we cut the state budget, we can shift more of the burden to the state through that savings and then save you on your property taxes. And so I think that's the place to start. I think if we execute on this plan, we can just begin by cutting property taxes by 30 to 35%. That'll be a starting point. It'll provide significant relief to families. But that's only the beginning. I think we need to finish the job and actually reduce entirely and eliminate property taxes and switch to a new system, because I think the system of property taxes is antiquated and it needs to go away.
On a slightly different subject that you mentioned, which was food dyes, I know it's getting a lot of publicity in the media, and just can you talk a little bit more about what they're doing? As a mom of two growing boys, you know, it's easy to grab random foods and, you know, snacks and stuff, junk food, and it's full of this stuff, I realize, and it's a constant battle in our home. So what can you tell us about that and what you'll do?
Well, we're seeing on the national level, RFK Jr. really leading the way on the Make America Healthy Again movement, and I think it's opening a lot of people's eyes. You know, what we're used to doing every day by consuming some of the foods that we've consuming, but then we realize, wait a second, these are petroleum-based products that are coming to America from places just next door to Wuhan, China. And I don't know of a lot of great things that have come out of Wuhan, China lately, and these food dyes are included. And so I think it's a good opportunity for our state to join that effort, because these petroleum-based, I mean, they're literally petroleum-based food dyes that we're putting into our foods. And if you ask some others out there, they'll say, boy, I can actually tell when my kid has consumed a lot of these products with food dyes. It affects behavior, and we don't even know the long-term health consequences of these. And so we're gonna join the effort, and we're gonna do things to protect our kids to start with from unnecessary ingredients in our food. And so we're gonna start with our high school and elementary lunch programs and eliminate these food dyes, and we're gonna try to do everything that we can do to join the effort to make America and South Dakota healthy again.
So I appreciate the dye discussion and the Make America Healthy Again. Can you talk a little bit about alternative dye options that may be more natural based, and if that might be beneficial for South Dakota?
Sure, yeah. Well, there are plant-based alternatives from carrots or beets, etc. And, with the country shifting towards those dyes, it might open up new markets for our producers in South Dakota to start producing some of those things. And so I think it's an opportunity for agriculture states too to shift from those sorts of dyes to plant-based healthy alternatives. So I think it's just a great opportunity all around for the state of South Dakota.
Where do you stand on election integrity in South Dakota? And do you support hand counting of ballots like in our municipal and school board elections? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Well, I am an advocate of election integrity. We've passed some bills, and I've worked with some election integrity real champions from across the state to try to bring about more integrity to our election system. Of course, we all saw after the 2020 election how important that is for our country and our state. And I've been on the record as expressing some real hesitations about some of our voting machines that we're using in the state of South Dakota. I don't know if you realize this, but these voting machines, we don't even know how the software is programmed. It's proprietary, and the companies won't show us how it works. Moreover, if you want to gain access to things like cast vote records, which help us to audit the election, you actually have to pay this company that's based in Illinois, by the way. You actually have to pay the company more money to get that information. So I'm not comfortable with the system where we farm our counting of our ballots out to third-party, out-of-state companies. I think that's a bad idea. And so I think we need to look at, there was a bill that came before the legislature. I'm looking back at Scott again. Boy, we've been in a lot of battles together. There was a bill that came before the legislature that would have prevented people from submitting petitions to have their counties do hand counting. I support those people's efforts to do that, to try that at the county level. And there was a bill at the last second of legislative session that would have said the counties can reject those petitions. We stood up and fought hard, and we killed that bill. And so I'm going to continue to do everything that I can do to make sure that election integrity advocates in this state are supported, that we have secure and fully auditable elections in this state, so we know that our elections are strong and secure and fair for the people.
So we've saved babies in South Dakota. I'm a social worker and I don't like social programs. So now what? Because we're getting inundated with phone calls from women who are very desperate because the culture has told them that they should abort, and now it's illegal. So how do we now change the culture to support the babies we've now saved?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, sometimes there's government solutions to things and sometimes there's not. And sometimes it's just a cultural solution. And so I think the best, rightest answer to that question is all of us, the people of this state, good Christian people of this state, need to step up and be there for those mothers and those fathers when they really need it. We're all pro-life. And so we need to not just say that we're pro-life, but live that we're pro-life. And so if there's somebody that that's in that situation, that needs help, that needs guidance, that needs support, first of all, our pregnancy help centers in the state are amazing. They're incredible. As I mentioned Leslie Under's name earlier, she runs the Pregnancy Help Center in Sioux Falls. It's called the Alpha Center. And I oftentimes visit there, and they do incredible, incredible work for particularly young women in the state who are in these crisis pregnancy situations. And oftentimes I walk away from there, and it's easy to forget what's going on every day at our pregnancy help centers, where they're living a Christian life, a Christian example, being there for these women and these fathers as they're in these situations. And so if you know somebody who's in that situation, number one, I would say, please do contact one of our pregnancy help centers. They are amazing people that can provide so many resources, but also let's just all commit to being there for these young mothers and fathers and helping any way that we can, embracing them, and also just living a life of strong, healthy families. I think one of the best things that we can do in this state as a culture is just be a model of what it looks like to be a healthy family, and the joy and the fulfillment that that brings when you're a healthy family, and to have young parents see that and then desire that because they see the joy and the fulfillment that comes in those situations. That's nothing that a bill can do. That's something that we do as South Dakotans, as good Christian people. And so let's do that.
I'm just going to add a little bit to that. I could be commenting on all of these, and John's giving such great answers. I would just comment, and I'm not as familiar with your pregnancy help center, but I'm sure it probably mirrors some of the things that we see in Sioux Falls. And I was so impressed by watching what they do at the Alpha Center. This is not just having an ultrasound and getting somebody to go through with the pregnancy. This is the follow through. This is training. This is, do you know how to budget money? They have programs for that. They have programs for dads to say, how do you be a good father? How do you be a husband? They have programs, for single moms to know how do you manage time. These are things that so many of these young people that are having a child that was not expected, that they don't have some of these life skills. And those are the things that I see that they have been bringing to the table for some of these young people that are just so key to them being successful when they choose to either keep their child or, possibly just seeing them through the adoption process. So if there's any way that we can come together as, it's so many things that I see, it's like, where is the church? Where is the church? And we need to stand up with the churches, encouraging our churches and our pastors and our fellow lay people to get involved in these efforts with life, because it's life, liberty, and property, or life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, right? It used to be pursuit of our property. But all of those things go hand in hand, but number one is life. It's what God has given us, and it's a reflection of who He is. So that's all I had to add. Thank you.
This past spring, the governor, he vetoed HB 1169. Would you have signed that?
That's the geographical distribution requirement bill?
Correct. Amendment G would have never made it to on the ballot if the Senate as well as the representatives get this passed.
Yes.
This needs to be passed in the state of South Dakota.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you for that. I definitely would have signed that bill. And just for anybody who's not familiar with that bill, when people go out and petition to put something on the ballot, what happens in practicality is that they go and they stand mostly at the county admin steps in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and then maybe out in Rapid City, and then maybe sometimes in Aberdeen. But if you ask people in the rural part of state of South Dakota, they've probably never seen a petition circulator. They have no say in what goes on their ballot. They don't get a choice. It just they get to November, and here's a bunch of leftist policies that just thrust right onto their ballot. And so I actually worked with Representative May back in the day to write the bill that she eventually carried. That there was this bill. It was the first time it was introduced. I authored that bill. It failed then. We got it back introduced this year. It was introduced, and then it passed the legislature, and it got vetoed by the governor. So what this bill would do is to set up a geographical distribution requirement. And so you can't just pay people a bunch of money to be in Sioux Falls and in Rapid City. Instead, you actually have to go out and talk to people in the rural areas and get their buy-in too about what comes onto their ballot. I think that's a great bill. I think it's a necessary bill. If you look at the states where they do have the petition, the initiative and referendum process, half of them have a geographical distribution requirement that this bill would have required. So they have something like it. And so I agree with you. I think it's really important that we do that, and we're going to continue to make sure that it gets done.
Unclaimed property, thank you.
Yeah.
And, but I don't know if these people, I didn't know about it until just this last year. So I don't know if you'd want to explain that to these folks as
Sure.
an idea, because that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. So if you're not familiar with unclaimed property, what happens with unclaimed property, and the reason why we have so much of it in South Dakota is because we have national banks that are chartered in the state of South Dakota. And so if there's unclaimed property, that is property like, let's say you got a refund on your credit card or something like that, and it just sat there and you didn't use it, and after a certain amount of time, they actually have to turn that over to the state. So then the state gets that money, and what's been happening in the past is that money just gets thrown out the door, you know, on this special project or that special project or this pet project or whatever. Well, shout out to Senator Taffy Howard. Senator Howard has been working for a very long time to create a trust fund. And so rather than just throwing that money out the door, we as a people can actually put that money into a savings account and then use the interest to fund some of our necessary government programs rather than having to tax you more to do those things. And so that was a measure that we passed just this last legislative session to start setting up that task force. And I think it's a big win. And I give a big shout out to Senator Howard for getting that done.
Thank you both for being here. Jon, I really appreciate, Speaker, what you had mentioned about the terrible divide between, not divide, but discrepancy between the authority of the executive branch and the legislative branch. Having served not as a legislator, but as a spouse, I've seen that over and over and over again. So I appreciate what you said about the budget, but what are some other ways that you could see restoring the authority to the legislature?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of things where, well, here's an example. I mean, here's one that just comes to mind because it's something I was just talking about with some folks just a minute ago. But right now, you look at the game fish and parks, for instance, and with the game fish and parks, the administration controls all of the money that's controlled by the game fish and parks. That doesn't, like other agencies, it doesn't come into the general budget that we can then we have a say on how we expend that money. And so that's an example of where, maybe we ought to put the game fish and parks money through the general appropriations bill and fund that just like we do every other branch of government. We've also seen some bad deals like the South Dakota One Stop, for instance. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there's one here and there's one in Sioux Falls. And the one in Sioux Falls, for instance, it's an office complex. Okay, so the administration wanted to take all of the state agencies kind of in the Sioux Falls area and put them all under one roof. Okay, well, that's not a bad idea from the outset, but what the state went ahead and did without any legislative oversight or approval was they contracted for a lease, and the lease is a 30-year lease for $300 million. 30-year lease, $300 million. After the 30 years, all we get is to go beg for another lease renewal. Now, contrast that to another building that's currently for sale in Sioux Falls. It's the old Citibank building. I think it's more square footage. It's in good shape. That's a $34 million building. And so that should have never happened. That's called a bad deal for taxpayers. And so we already passed a law to make sure that the legislature will have oversight of those things going forward. But I think the legislature, when you get into those things, it's appropriate that the legislature has more oversight over leases like that too. Because otherwise, things like this happen. The executive branch has entered into some really bad deals, and we want to make sure that stuff like that does not happen again in South Dakota.
Yeah, my name is Jeff Hunt, and I live at Dupree, South Dakota. I'm kind of a minority here because I'm a tribal member of my tribe, and we live on an Indian reservation. And my daughter, who's a legislature in the state legislature, I've told her, you can go down there and fight against the green new energy and our rotten judicial system, and we don't believe in abortion, all these things, but it really doesn't have a lot of effect to the way we have to live and what we're under the jurisdiction of the federal government as tribal members and living there. So I guess my question is, Christine Ohm was banned from our reservation and several other reservations. There's not a good relationship between tribal governments and the state government. What Have you thought about that issue, or what can you do to make life better for the Indian people and people that are under the jurisdiction of the federal government that's so woke and so liberal because of the Democrats that have been in power? You know, do you have any comments on that issue? And what can you do to make our life better and the people that we have to convince to vote for you back home? I guess
Yeah,
that's my question.
thank you. That's a great question. And I have a question for you, and it's, I want to know how to raise good kids. Because I know Jana, and I know your parenting skills, and you must be doing some things right. So I appreciate that. I'm always on the lookout for good parenting tips. I think that issue is something that's it's incredibly important. I mean, you look at some of our reservations in South Dakota, and it's some of the poorest counties in the entire United States of America. And, you know, a lot of that does stem from federal policies over the years. And as a state, I come at it from certainly a point of humility, not actually having all the answers, but having an open heart to go to our brothers and sisters on the Native American reservations and just reopen that dialogue and that conversation and really talk about solutions. What can we do as a state? I mean, I would come at it from a servant's perspective to the tribes and just say, what can we do for you? I mean, I recognize the problems that you recognize. I think it's really serious. And I definitely have a heart for turning the cultural and economic situations around and the crime that happens. And, you know, I go and visit the women's prison on occasion. I did that especially, you know, as I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee for all those years. And you see a lot of Native women in our women's prison, and it's just heartbreaking. Because you think about all of the situations and the brokenness that has led to that being the case, and then the recidivism, because you know, there's not really in many cases, a strong foundation to return to. And so, you know, I'm not one to go to the tribes and preach about what I think they need to do, but I will approach the tribes with an open heart to say, what can we do together to help fix this situation?
With the announcement of the two of you, Speaker Pro Tem and Speaker of the House, if you are elected, you're going to leave a huge hole for the rest of us that are going to have to serve. And we know behind the scenes, your, I guess, establishment ones are already working toward to find someone to fill your position and find someone to fill her position. That scares me because I have been under 3 conservative leaderships and 1 not so friendly. So I'm a little concerned that we're losing both our speaker and our speaker pro tem for the 2027 session. And that's going to hurt a lot of us in getting legislation across, because we like to keep the second floor at the second floor. Stay out of the third floor, okay?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. From my perspective, I'm actually termed out. So it's the end of the legislative line for me in the House anyway. But one thing that I've always taken good care of in my district, and I know Karla does too, is just to be good stewards of our district and try to make sure that, you know, this is a lasting thing for conservative values and the things that we hold dear. And so I've been already speaking with a number of people who are ready and willing to step up and take over my seat. I know Karla has done the same thing. And so I think we're going to have, you know, not to brag on my district too much, but we've got a great conservative district in District 25. Thank you. Yeah, it's my former district mate over here, Randy Gross. And so, you know, we're going to make sure that we fill those seats with good conservatives and do what we've done in the past, and also go out and recruit other great conservatives from across the state to make sure that we have a legislature that actually represents the people and not corporate special interests.